So I got 10 minutes, 12 minutes before we should get started here. I just thought there were a few fun news articles, and this one was interesting. So Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies have an enormous problem, of course. The first thing anybody would think is that now your money can get hacked and stolen, and this keeps happening with no end of triggers. This one was pretty interesting. This guy made a MyBTG wallet, claiming to be an online wallet for Bitcoin Gold. So the idea is you'd make an online wallet, and then you type those secret. Remember, you have when you set up your wallet in this class, you had about 12 or 14 words. You type them in and give it to them on the server, which is already a terrible idea. That's the whole. Your only security is that's your private key. But he put it up here, and he found that everyone reported their stuff being stolen. And so he went and found, here's the code, there's JavaScript code that is being used, right? And he found that there was a version briefly that had this one extra line, where it takes a cookie and makes it from something called GTAG equals GTAGM. And that's the code that steals your private key. And you can see it because he found it down here. Here's the mnemonic seed. Mnemonic words is mnemonic 2 words. And here it is running 2 words and putting it in that variable, GTAGM. So GTAGM is your 12 or 14 words that define your wallet, and he sends it with a cookie up to his server. So it's pretty simple. Every time you enter it, that mnemonic is base64 encoded, transmitted in the cookie, stored in the cookie, and transmitted to Google, where they can now steal all your money, which is what he did. This happens over and over and over. And this is why so many people get ripped off on Bitcoin, because they don't understand it, and they trust someone with the secret private key, which they shouldn't be trusting anybody with. And there was a similar one. It's amazing how much people love Ethereum when all the major things done with it are disasters that lead to incredible loss of money. First, there was the DAO that led to $100 million being stolen. And then there was the one just last week, some token thing that led to $200 or $300 million being destroyed. Although now they lowered it. And here's another one, an Ethereum startup. Started up, announced an initial coin offering, sold it for 2 days, and just vanished, stole the money. That's certainly an obvious one. This is probably the most common kind of hack, like what happened at Mt. Gox. I open some kind of exchange, you give me your money, then I just say, I buy and leave, and I take your money.
Didn't Bitcoin price went up, right?
Bitcoin price went up again.
Yeah,
yep.
Like went up like 150.
Oh yes, it goes up and up.
Yeah.
And I think 7% of all the Bitcoins in the world have been stolen by crooked banks, most of them Mt. Gox, and an awful lot of Ethereum has now been stolen or destroyed through bugs. It is, the first thing you'd think would happen when you have a currency is somebody might hack it, and that is certainly the experience of most people, of a lot of people. Anyway, so the feds are not doing anything about stingrays, so Illinois did. And the EFF is very excited about this because this is a way a state could limit the cops using these things. Illinois just outlawed the cops using them, essentially with only a couple of exceptions. So that means they can't use it for state prosecutions. Of course, there are already propositions out there to take it over from the federal level and deny the states the right to have different laws, and that may happen. But until that happens, the states can pass limits, and that may be one way for the privacy advocates to get what they want. All right. Anyway, so this one was quite interesting. And so the websites are, there's lots of these third-party people recording everything you do, like the financial one that just got hacked, whose name I forget. There's 3 financial people that keep track of all your credits. Anyway, this is another one I hadn't heard of. These people don't advertise except to businesses, but this company, some third party is used. You put them on your page like Google Analytics, but it's not Google, it's somebody else, and they record everything that happens so you can do targeted ads. And they record every keystroke and every mouse click, and they send it in plain text over the internet. So even if the login is encrypted, the analytics is still dumping your private data unencrypted. And there's a variety of entertaining things going wrong here.
Is there an app that people log into a program in the computer?
Yeah, no, it's something the website developer put on everything. Oh, I forgot to turn off my phone, evidently. Well, I'd like to leave a message. Anyway, all right. So
is the website that load a program onto your computer once you
no, I think they run it on the server. This is analytics. This is ad targeting. People run them on servers so they can target what their users do.
Oh, so it's you go to their website and then they record all
Yeah, then record what you do.
Website.
Yeah, that's right. And so even if what you're doing is encrypted on the way to the website, they might be making another copy of it for analytic purposes and sending it unencrypted. So it's quite a job and pretty interesting. And people are getting upset about this, so we'll see what happens. A couple of big companies have already quit using it. This reminds me a lot of the scandal about iPhones. Something came out about iPhones about 4 years ago that they were running some analytic tool that was recording everything you did. And when people found out, they quit using it. Everyone quit using it. They keep doing this. What's that?
So, backtrack to when I went to whatever the little mini convention. So this is one booth. It's sort of social engineering that they took over an iPhone, iOS. So I saw part of that they were able to took over the iPhone and it would record like my conversation and took a couple photos. And then even though this is off, I thought that I didn't have time to spend everything, but I just thought it was fascinating. But I asked how to do it. It has to be almost like a company email. And then once you download that attachments,
right,
bam, doesn't matter which, even though it's iOS, it still can take over the file.
You know, I've heard, this has been known for like 5 years. See, you can install apps on an iPhone that did not come from the iPhone store. If you have a company attachment that you click on in your email, it turns on like a company policy, which lets you sideload apps. And then you can put on anything you want. And that has been like a worry for a while. If you click on something in email, it can install a policy, which now lets them install apps that aren't in the store. And that sounds like what they did.
Okay. And then a lot of the vendors do not have like any kind of anti-malware, antivirus for iOS.
Oh, I don't think anybody has any anti-malware for iOS. You can't put it on.
But why there's some claim that they do, like 1 or 2.
Really?
I shoot right on their name because there was just too many booths. It was like 15 booths. And 2 of them say, yeah, we do. Like, okay.
I'd sure like to hear about any kind of antivirus for iOS and how you put it on. I don't think Apple will let you do it. Maybe only for jailbroken ones, if there's such a thing as products for jailbroken ones. I don't know.
Okay.
That's interesting. I'm not aware of it. Anyway, so that's not that exciting. So the intelligence agency has issued some statement claiming they are going to be more transparent about their hoarding of vulnerabilities because first Snowden and now the shadow brokers have made it abundantly clear that the NSA can't keep their secrets. And yet they'd have to basically go out of business if they change their business model enough not to have secrets. So they have to, I can't imagine what this can be other than smoke and mirrors, and that's what Bruce Schneier says. It's just a PR lie, like when Google pretended to anonymize things by moving the last few bits of the IP address, which doesn't really do anything. But anyway, it's a very strange thing for a spy agency to claim they're going to be transparent. I don't understand how they can, and as far as I can tell, they aren't, but they're trying to give the appearance of being transparent.
I think it was a big deal because they would like give all the partial information to the vendor when they find it out about vulnerability. So they would say like, oh, you have to somehow patch that and that product, but wouldn't actually tell what exactly to patch.
Yeah.
And now I think they will change it to give like more technical detailed information. So I'm not sure, like it sounds like they're going to run pen testing for these companies, which is kind of nonsense, right?
Well, I mean, they might want to give more information to the companies, but I think what Bruce Schneier points out is they can, anytime they feel like it's important, they can opt not to notify the company, which is kind of what they have to do, and they kind of can't have anybody overseeing that process, and so it's not clear what you're accomplishing here. But I mean, the whole idea, this is something I think only America makes any attempt to do, is to oversee a secret agency. It's kind of an oxymoron, but yeah. But on the other, anyway.
Trying to make Americans trust government and agencies when Russia, they just gave up business. okay, yeah, we'll do it.
I know, it's a strange thing. So Amazon has now launched a secret cloud service for the intelligence agency. It's supposed to be secret enough for them to use it. Boy, I don't know what's going to become of this one. One of the many comments I saw on Twitter is immediately, when they also have a microphone and a camera in your home. But of course they do, but supposedly there's a difference between these two. My first thought is, as if the secret agencies aren't losing enough data. They're going to put it in the public cloud. When the next year we're going to be reading about, oh my God, the secrets leaked out of the public cloud. I don't know. Anyway, that's life. Gee, got anything else interesting here?
Yeah, the Linus comment.
What's that?
The Linus letter or message. I was reading it and I was like, wow, you're allowed to say this as a professional.
Well, yes, Thorvalds is always like that.
Well, public health failed HIPAA compliant. San Francisco.
What's that?
DPH failed their HIPAA compliance.
What's EPH?
San Francisco Department of Public Health.
Oh, the DPH. Oh, the Department of Public Health.
Department of Public
Oh,
Health.
I didn't. Oh, so
They're
they were
not
leaking
in
data?
So maybe auto health data or food.
Well, very likely, yes. I'm not too surprised. And here's that one he's mentioning, Linus has never had much patience with the security community. From his point of view, we're all just crazy. We should just shut up. He said this several times. What you should do is just put productive features and things and stop inventing all these exotic attacks and exotic defenses and just go away. Then this guy wanted to make a whitelisting feature in the kernel that would notice when processes are doing something bad and terminate them. And Linus is dead set against that because he says security features should not be baked into the kernel and they shouldn't be terminating processes that look bad. That's just going to lead to performance disasters. And the guy said, well, I left in a way to turn it off. And he said, well, you're turning it off because you're an idiot. It doesn't work yet. Don't come to me until it works. And you don't need to turn it off. You might be right about that. But anyway, this has been a big issue. I remember quite a few of the vulnerabilities I came across. I wondered why they didn't patch the kernel. And they said, we don't care about fixing security problems in the kernel. We regard that as something that you would add with apps on the outside if you care. But the only point of the kernel is to be fast and efficient and stable, and security problems are not our problem. And that might be right. It's an interesting.
You don't have to say that. PeopleSoft was again, they forbidding us patch anything into the kernel. They say this is how low the exact version. And while there's patches, they just know you break it, you're off the contract.
Yeah, well, it's a reasonable position to take that you just shouldn't be messing with the kernel. Anyway, we're up to digital signatures, and your last project up, so this should be good, clean fun. So we're going to talk about what digital signatures are and then various digital signature schemes, including the one that is approved by the government, the DSA. So the point of digital signatures is to get non-repudiation. So Alice orders a pink car, then when she sees how ridiculous a pink car is, she doesn't want to buy it. Now Bob has to prove that she promised to buy that car, so he doesn't end up stuck with a car. So what he wants is non-repudiation. He wants a contract that you can't deny later, and that's not so bad. So non-repudiation is not confidentiality. It is just that you can't lie later about it. So your message is plain text X, and you send your message over a public channel because it's not a secret. And you could also encrypt it with any of the techniques we talked about before if you care about that, but that's not what the signature is for. The signature is just another thing you add to an S. And the point of this S is anybody can verify that you actually signed it, and therefore you cannot deny later that you agreed to this. So that's the idea. You have a number, this blob of binary attached to the message, which is the digital signature. And this was defined the digital signature standard and passed in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in 1998 under Jimmy Carter in order to make business possible over the internet. Because you can't have things like loans and, purchases like this on installment and all that jazz until you can have irrevocable signatures over the internet that have the same legal force as a signature with a pen and paper, and that's what this law passed. So since 1998 in America, you can now sign something with a digital signature, and you are now in a contract legally just as much as if you signed a signature with a pen. That's the idea. So here's the basic digital signature protocol. Bob has to create a public and private key pair. Then he publishes the public key. Then he signs the message with his private key. uses this private key, it uses the plain text message and creates this signature, which nobody else can create because nobody else has a private key, but anybody can verify with his public key. So as long as you are sure you know which key is Bob's public key, which is of course a weak spot, then anybody can verify that's really Bob. And as long as you believe that Bob hasn't let a copy of his private key escape his control, he's the only one that could have signed it. So there are, of course, some risks, but there always are some risks. So here's the security objectives that you might want. Confidentiality is making sure that third parties cannot read the text. Integrity, make sure that the message has not been altered. Authentication means that you know who wrote the message. And non-repudiation means that person cannot deny later that they wrote it. There are other things you might want, like identification, where you actually know who a person is. Access control, limit who can get things, availability, auditing, physical security, anonymity. These are all things that cryptography can help, but the signature itself doesn't really get you much of any of these things except 2, 3, and 4. It gives you integrity because when you verify the signature, that includes a hash of the message. It can't have been altered. It gives you authentication. You know who said it, and it gives you non-repudiation. It doesn't, by the way, really prove who that person is. It just proves that the same person that posted that public key.
So
yeah.
Like DocuSign?
Like what?
DocuSign?
Well, I have seen these online signature things, and I really don't know how they work. Supposedly, they implement this, but I don't really know. They're pretty opaque. There's things where you open up some PDF file, you do something, and then they say, now you've signed it. Yeah, I wonder how well they hold up in court. Their ability to hold up in court would, I think, depend on them adhering to the DSS. And I don't really know what they do. It's a good question. Anyway, I got some cahoots someplace. Let's see. All right. All right, 141. Digital signature, that looks like the right stuff. All right. There we go.
These guys have a commercial on NPR now.
Who does?
Oh no, that's Zoom, sorry.
Well, these guys, that would be cool if they did. What's that?
The game bit has always been 7 digits.
Oh, it's been what?
7 digits for the.
No, it used to be 6 or 5. I think they're getting bigger.
A couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I've seen it 7 more often now. So I think they're getting more and more popular.
Or they want it to appear that way.
That's correct. It could be. You have a bitter, cynical mind, which is appropriate for security specialists. Don't just believe anything you see, but think about how it could be a trick. All right. So I guess I'll wait another few seconds and see if we're going to get more. But there certainly are more total students than this. But there are Kahoot abstainers. I observed them. Aha. There's another one. All right, another 5 seconds. All right. 5 questions. Alice signs a message. What security feature does she not get? All right, you do not get confidentiality from the signature. All you get are these other things, but the signature does not provide confidentiality. You would have to provide encryption, another layer of encryption to do that. All right, she signs a message. What key does she use to make the signature? All right, she uses her private key. That's right, and it doesn't have anything to do with who it's going to. It's just a public document that anybody in the world can verify. All right, she signs a message. What key does Bob use to verify the signature? Okay, her public key, signs it with her private key. Anybody can verify it with her public key. All right. So what algorithm can you use for digital signature on this list? You have to use a public key algorithm. Private key encryption will never work because two people have the key. So 3 of these are private. RSA is the only public key system on the list. And here's a similar one. What algorithm here can be used for digital signature? Okay, once again, ECC is the only public key system. All the rest are private, and private key systems can never make a good digital signature. Not by themselves. All right, I got winners. I actually know who these people are. That's good.
So does the do the electronic voting machines use this system?
Electronic voting machines are in fact deeply disturbing.
Yep.
And there was a guy from Stanford. The guy from Stanford at this contest was an expert on them. They do a lot of stupid things. They don't generally transmit the data over the internet. They did in Estonia, and the Russians hacked them like crazy, totally subverted their election. In America, they don't send the data over the internet, but they do write it on little SD cards, which you have to get, and they move it around, and it turns out to have a lot of security flaws. So much that most voting machines have been declared unsafe and people have stopped using them. But quite a few states, like I think Pennsylvania, continue to use machines that are known to be unsafe. They just don't seem to care. But I don't think most security experts have said just forget the whole thing and use paper.
Because I'm confused with there's this thing going around where ResistBot, where you're able to message or send a letter to your congressperson or senator, and I was curious that since it uses this system, do they also use it for that system as well?
ResistBot. Well, I don't know what it does.
You're texting or emailing your congressperson and they automate it, but I'm not sure about the legality of it.
Well, it doesn't sound like anything new. I mean, there's always been these mail writing campaigns where many people send identical letters to senators and such. Those have been around even before the computers, and they just hand them out and mail them in. So I don't understand what's different about the new one. Unless it happens without your consent. That would be illegal. That's happened over and over. There was a spam fighting system called Blue Code or something about 10 years ago that you could install that would automatically send a reply to every person that sent spam to you to like flood their servers and take it down. And that was declared illegal, as it was basically a volunteer joining a botnet to denial of service attack. But yeah.
And notice I've always written to my Congress people, U.S. Congress, and it wasn't until about 5 years ago or so, or maybe less, that the U.S. Senate, the online email, had HTTPS.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
And Jackie would.
Oh, sure.
I would always put, this is the phony information because you're not secure. How do we know?
Well, it certainly is true. If you're not secure, it would be easier to send fake ones and all that. But I mean, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, government systems are very slow to adapt. The U.S. military has now, for like the last 5 years or so, they've published security standards, and they've begun auditing their systems. And every time they do, they are like 99% out of compliance. They finally decided what you should do, but they don't have the technical ability or the money to come anywhere near complying to it yet. So they're using old junk that they haven't had a chance to upgrade. So it's at least now they advertise, they publish their failure to achieve compliance. So in case anybody had any illusions about it, they know. But the government and the education sector are always miles behind commercial business. Small and medium businesses are miles behind the big companies.
We can bomb up.
I don't know.
We can buy weapons and we can't comply with it.
Well, I don't think our weapons are all that safe either.
I don't mean they're all that expensive.
They're expensive, yeah, but I'm not sure it makes them safe or reliable. Yeah, so I think we've got a lot of flaws at many levels of the system. Anyway, so the RSA scheme. Works like this. You make a public and private key, and the private key is a D, which is, based on the two round numbers P and Q, and is the product of P and Q, the usual stuff. So what you do is you take the plain text message to the D mod N, and D is your private key, but nobody knows. And then you send that as your signature. If anybody wants to verify it, just takes the signature to the E mod N. And remember, D and E are multiplied together, and they are 1 mod phi of N, which is P minus 1 times Q minus 1. And they're always carefully chosen in this section where E is very small, almost always 65537, and D is therefore very big. This is the efficient way to use RSA because it's expensive to sign it, but it's very easy to verify. And that's what you want, because one signature is verified by many people. So all the client has to do is take the signature to the E mod N, and E is only 65,000, so that's a pretty simple calculation. And if the new X matches the old X, then that is exactly what was signed, and it was signed by that person. It's a pretty simple system, and as you'll see, it has plenty of security holes. But that's the signature protocol, and this just shows you the same thing. So in terms of security, of course, if your key is not long enough, like at least 1024, and these days probably 2048 or 3 times 1024, 3072, then there's a possibility that somebody could factor it. Although nobody has ever factored a 1024-bit number yet, but they have factored a 768-bit one, and people expect 1024 to fall pretty soon. So that's the first thing. If you don't have that, they can just factor the number, and that ruins the whole thing mathematically. Then there's an issue of performance, which we talked about. If your E is small and your D is big, the performance is really quite good for verification and just slow for signing, and that's the way most people want it. But you can, of course, have a man-in-the-middle attack or a counterfeit public key, and the whole system is shot because the mathematics can't do anything about that. So a third party can just publish a fake key pretending to be Bob, and anybody that falls for it is going to believe signatures based on the wrong private key. Factory N we talked about. And then there's the Existential Forgery app, which is your last homework, the official homework in this class, which is pretty awesome. This is one of several serious defects in this system. And it goes like this. Suppose now I'm sending an email to a human who is going to decrypt it and read it. Then I can't fool anybody. And even if I'm sending a signed, not encrypted email to someone, they would notice if they can't read the email, but I might be talking to an automated system. Just wants me to verify who I am by signing something. And if that's the case, they might not notice if the thing I'm signing is gibberish. So you could do this. Bob, you take Bob's public key, you could just choose a signature and then calculate S to the E mod N to make your plain text. You could create gibberish plain text that matches that signature. That's very easy to do. There's nothing to prevent this. And now, when they go to this end, they're going to take your message is S to the E, so they're going to take S to the E to the D. I don't know if I'm explaining it very well. Let's see, you got D and E. So my message is S to the E. To verify, let's go back up to the previous verification and make sure I'm getting this straight. Okay, so here's the verification. They take the signature to the E. Okay. So my message is S to the E. So my message is gibberish, but if I calculate S to the E, I'm going to get this message. I just reproduce their calculation at this end. So the gibberish message will match the result of taking the signature to the E. So I can easily, without knowing the private key, I can make a message and signature pair that match. It's just that I can't control the contents of the message. And if you remember the padding oracle attack, it was like this. You can fool AES without knowing the key, as long as you're willing to do some damage to the message and have a block turn into just gibberish, you can make other blocks come out the way you want. And this is similar here. If I'm willing to let the whole message just go to junk, I can create a valid signed message without the key. So that's called the existential forgery attack. Yeah?
Can you only create one message?
No, you can make many as you want. You can choose anything for the signature. And you can just make as many as you want. So you could, in fact, make millions of them and hunt for one that actually has plain text that you like.
Huh.
And there's nothing to stop you here. That's a good point. So anyway, that's the game here. And that is, of course, an undesirable security property. It is possible for an attacker to create valid signature pairs. And that shouldn't be possible. Now, of course, they can't easily generate messages like put $1,000 in Oscar's account Although, as he pointed out, in principle, they could try by brute force to just generate signatures until that happens. But if your key is reasonably long, you've got like 1,024 bits of randomness, and they probably can't do too much of that before they run out of time. But they could do it to some extent, and in fact, you have to do it in the project. It's some of the challenges. So I think I'll just move on to the homework at this point. We're far enough to talk about this next homework assignment, especially with that intelligent question, anticipating what I've got here. So the last project, I'll probably have some more extra credits coming. This is the last one that'll count. Okay, so to do the existential forgery attack. And so first, as usual, I've got the old required part is the part where I tell you everything to do. And the extra credit is where you have to figure things out with less and less clues. So generate a public and private key pair. Don't use mine, but generate your own. So remember this mess, this OpenSSL will give you an N and a P and a Q and an E and a D. All the numbers you need for RSA. They're all related, of course. So once you've got them, then you can make a signature. So if you have a message X, all you have to do is take it to the D mod N to make a signature. That's the signature. And anybody who receives it takes S to the E mod N. And if that reproduces the original message, the signature is verified. So you make a message like Project 16 from your name. Then you encode it somehow. We're just going to take the bytes of hex and turn them into hexadecimal numbers and call it a big number. That's the simplest encoding scheme. There are plenty of other ways to encode it, but that's an easy way. So this is just going to be readable ASCII, PROJ. Just make that one big base 16 number. That's your message. Now you should check the length. I used 512-bit RSA, which is the default, because the defaults were set long ago. And that means I only can have a message 512 bits long. And that means I can only have 64 bytes. So you can't get too long with your name here. This is 48 bytes. If you exceed 64 bytes, it isn't going to work. So the simplest answer here is just shrink up your name as necessary, abbreviate things to fit in this for this project. So now I got the message. All I have to do is have N, E, and D, which I get from that OpenSSL generated key. And then I just take this number, which is X, to turn it into an integer, it's base 16, and then use the POW function. Remember, you can do X star star D %E, and it will take forever. You have to do it with the POW function. That will use a square and multiply algorithm or something very fast. So if you forget to do this, which I did, you will know because it will just freeze. And you'll be waiting forever until you realize you didn't better knock it off and use the POW function. Then, so this POW function here, so that is the signature. That long mess of hexadecimals, the signature of that message with those keys. Now you can verify it. So you take X prime, which I'll call an XP, which is S to the E mod N. That is the signature raised to E mod N, which is supposed to reproduce the message. Now the problem is it's coming as a long base 10 number, and I want to compare it to ASCII text. So I just have to go through a few exchanges. Use hex to turn it into hex, trim out the 0x at the start of it, then decode it from hex back to ASCII, and you will reconstruct your original readable text. And that's the game. And all right, I had you print out the end to make sure you're not just using my key, but you're using your key. So that's encoding and decoding. So the missing step is forgery, so that's the last step. So we're going to make a forgery, and we're going to make a signature F for what? Because you can have anything for the signature. I'm not sure you can have 0. I decided not to mess with 0. Most of these things only count from like 2 or 3 up to N-1 or something. So, but you can certainly have a signature of F. That's legal. It's kind of nuts, but it's legal. So if the signature is F, I can calculate the message that corresponds to that by just taking S to the E mod N. So this is the message. This long blob of garbage has the signature F. And those two go together, and you can verify them. When you take F to the E mod N, you reconstruct the original garbage, which is just a long, unreadable hexadecimal mess. There's no point turning it into ASCII. If you do turn it into ASCII, you'll just get garbage like this. And when you do print stuff in ASCII, sometimes it's worse than that because you get character turns and backspaces and characters that change the language in the keyboard, and all sorts of stupid things happen when you try to print out unprintable stuff. So that's how you sign, verify signatures, and forge them. So I gave you some challenges. First one is sign it with your name. Make your name the signature and make a valid message. So your name should be a blob of hex spelling something out here, and your message is whatever it has to be to match my key, and I gave you my public key. So given that public key, forge a signed message which has your name in the signature. And that is pretty easy. Remember, you start with the signature, you can do anything you want. So that's only worth 10 points. And the next one is the one Tom anticipated. Sign a message and control the plaintext message to spell out your name. This is much, much harder to do, but it can be done. I was only able to do 3 letters before I ran out of patience. It takes a lot of guesses, so I recommend just 3 letters of your initials. And I think it's only going to look for 3 characters because after I did it, I decided 3 is the only reasonable amount to do, although if you're serious about GPUs and a lot of time, you could probably do more. But anyway, use the same public key and find a signature that creates a message that actually spells out your name in the first few bytes. And then you can get on the winner's board. I managed to spell out you. So anyway, that should get you out of trouble. And we have time. Let's just go back to here. So that's the RSA existential forgery. Yeah.
Good question. With the existential forgery attack, since you can create a lot of gibberish but verifiable messages, does it open the door to like additional denial of service attacks? Whereas a server might reject an unverifiable message, but they'll let these in, or
well, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I suppose it's possible under some systems that generating messages that pass this test would go further and waste more time. I suppose it's possible. I haven't heard of that happening, but you got a good point. If this was a test for passing on to further processing, then it would be bad. That's why, you know, this is, at first this seems like a very artificial attack, but in practice, this is probably a really bad thing to let people do. What you'd much rather have is a system where nobody can generate any valid signatures without the private key at all. And where messages that were prove that you really own the private key. That was kind of the point. So this very simple procedure is not really good enough, and it is not the digital signature standard. This is not the one with legal force. As you can see, this is just a step towards it. You have to add more to it. And so if you want to fix it, one thing to do is add the padding. The probabilistic signature standard is an improvement to RSA. Remember, everything has to be as long as the public key, 512 bits, 124 bits, something like that. So you have to pad it anyway, unless you have a really long message, which you don't normally encrypt with RSA anyway. So you're going to be padding. So what you do is you include a random key and a salt and a hash of the message in the pad, all of which someone cannot. So now they can no longer have just random bits in the plain text. If they do, it won't fetch. So you have an integrity check inside the plain text. And that's the game. So you use a random value salt, you add the padding and the hash value to the salt, and then you do some stuff like XOR the mask with something, I'm not quite sure why, but here's a sort of picture of it all. So you have your message, you hash it, and then pad the hash, then you put in some padding and salt, then you do an exclusive OR with another stuff, so you end up with your message having a bunch of hashes and verification parts in there, so random bits will not have this property. And now you really can't do it without the key. That's this fixes the basic problems. Now, if you pad with this correct probabilistic padding, then you can no longer do the existential forgery attack. That's the game. Now there's Elgamal, which is of course going to be quite similar. You generate a key pair. You need a random ephemeral key. You may remember this was needed for Elgamal transmission and encryption before. You sign with the private key, the ephemeral key, and the message. And the receiver can verify the signature from the signature in the public key. And this is essentially accomplishing the same thing as RSA plus the probabilistic padding. Yeah?
Is the key generated from 1024?
It has to be, at least 1024, sure. And probably more these days. 1024 as of maybe 5 or 6 years ago when your book was written. These days people recommend 2048 or 3072. So you choose a P and alpha and D and you calculate this secret. So you choose a large prime, you choose a primitive element alpha, then you choose another random integer D, which is the nonce, and then you compute this number. And that's the public key. It's P, alpha, and beta, and the private key is D. So there's an extra ephemeral key floating around, which so eventually it's not equal to RSA, it's much more like RSA plus that probabilistic signature to have an ephemeral key. The total amount of inputs and outputs are similar. So that's your signature. You sign it, and you can verify it, and it amounts to about the same kind of math as RSA. You take, you have to do one exponentiation to sign it, and then you have to do an exponentiation to verify the signature. So the verifier has to have the correct public key. P has to be 1024 bits or longer because it's based on the same discrete logarithm problem. And you can't reuse the ephemeral key. If you do, there's a very, then you end, it turns out the whole thing is totally shot. If you send two messages, because remember the plain text is not being concealed. So the attacker has the plain text. This is different than the encrypted method. So if you sign something twice with the same ephemeral key, then they know X1 and X2, and they have they know these other things, so they have two equations in two variables. They're looking for KE and D, and they can find them both. They can find your secret key from just two messages sent with the same ephemeral key. So you have to not make that mistake. All right. And so you can do an existential forgery attack, but if you hash the message before signing it, this becomes impossible. And therefore, most people, now what we talked about before is actually signing the message, but what most people do is hash the message and sign the hash, because that way you can have a longer message anyway. And that makes it impossible to do this. Anyway, here's the full digital signature algorithm, the one that's approved by the government, approved by National Institute of Standards and all this jazz. It's got a signature that's only 320 bits long. The verification is slower than RSA, but this is the one that is very popular. It's the one that has legal force. It uses two cyclic groups. There are various sizes, but the earlier one uses 1024 bits for the big group. That should be 2 to the 1024, not 10. Pardon me, there. There's nothing base 10 about the encryption we're using here. That would be a whole other world of insanity. So you have one large group that's 2 to the 1024, and you have another one that's 2 times 10 to the 60. 2 to the 160, and you make two groups. So you can make them longer. If you make, there's various, here's the levels you might want. If you want to go 2048 or 3072, which are the stronger levels you might want, you also have to increase the second group.
The second was 2 to the 160th?
Yeah, okay, of that order. And so here's your generation, generate one prime in the big group and generate another prime, another number in the second group that has to be related to the first prime. Then you find an alpha and a random integer, and you calculate the same thing, alpha to the d mod p. And now your keys, your public key has 4 numbers, and your private key has 1 number. So that's the game of it. You choose an ephemeral key to add on top of all this. Yeah?
What's the point for, what's the reason that you would want to create a prime of this size and another one of that it's supposed to do it in this way?
It's a good question, and I don't know. I didn't go into it in enough depth. It's in the book, I'm sure, but I didn't bother with it much. So you're going to calculate the SHA function of it and making your signature with it. So a lot of pieces go into it. And your verifying turns into quite a mess too. So it's quite a bit more complicated than simple RSA signatures. There's quite a few more steps, but this is the one that is considered more secure. That's why, in general, by the way, you should never try writing code like this yourself. You should use a standard library for this kind of mess, like AES. This is too many steps to do on your own. You're likely to make a mistake. And you might do it just for research purposes, but one of the rules is never roll your own crypto. Anything complicated like this, you want to just call it algorithm. Anyway, here's the security of this thing, and here's the security levels. This is the equivalent AES key level, essentially, private key. So 80 is the bare minimum, and here's 128 is up here. That's the game here. So these are the 3 levels that are generally recommended. All right, and that's DSA as far as I want to go into it. Again, you can't reuse the ephemeral key. If you do, the whole thing is shot. So this implies another difficult problem. You have to have somehow a random number generator you trust. All right, and then there's when you can do this all with elliptic curves, of course. Anything you can do with public, with RSA, you can also do with elliptic curves. You can choose bit lengths, 160 or longer. Your signature consists of 2 points, because everything is 2 points in here. So the signature is twice the used bit length, and it is, of course, faster, because everything is shorter. So you use an elliptic curve, you choose a random integer. You now have the multiplication by the random integer. Remember, you don't use exponentiation. In elliptic curves, you use multiplication, which is just as difficult as exponentiation of integers. And your key now has 6 numbers in the public key to give you a headache. And the private key is D. and you generate a signature out of that mess, and you can verify with that mess, but it's more complicated. That's why RSA is the simple kind that I expect you to really go through. These others, I'm not making the homework where you have to dig through these things. Although it's certainly in your book if you're interested enough to dig into these in detail. But I don't expect most of the class to be that interested in the details of these. Anyway, here's the security levels. This is one other thing which your book does not talk about much because they seem to dodge some of the political type scandals in your book. Most people do. Most mathematicians are sort of more shied away from this politics than I am. But this is one problem with elliptic curve cryptography. In fact, you can't just use any old elliptic curves. It's hard to find elliptic curves that have the right cryptographic properties. So what happens is the NSA tells you which ones to use, and almost everyone uses ones the NSA tells them to use. And they got caught by Microsoft lying to us and telling us to use one that they could break into. And there are a lot of people that suspect that the other ones they told us to use are similarly backdoored. So it is an issue. But in fact, people use standard curves figured out by somebody else. There's the National Institute of Standards, basically doing what the NSA told them to do. And then there's something called the Brain Pool Consortium. I don't know who those guys are, but if before you start using their group, you might want to try to figure out who they are and what their motivation is. But it is an issue. That's why another reason why a bunch of people are pretty leery about elliptic curve cryptography in practice, because it all relies on trusting the NSA to have your best interests at heart, which might be true if you're an American, but is probably not true if you're not an American. And some people aren't so sure if they have our best interests at heart either. It just depends on exactly how much you hate the government. Anyway, so that's the summary of the signature schemes. And I got another Kahoot about them. Let's take a look at that. All right.
So what do you think about those two quantum cloud computing projects that IBM announced, Google announced?
Well, I heard the quantum network transmission was a big thing. No one knows how good it is yet. But if it were possible to have qubits entangled at a distance, then you could have something like quantum distributed computing. That would bring a whole other world of interesting power to it. So that's the only one I heard of. Well, all of them are in like their early alpha version, where no one even knows exactly how good they are. And one measurement of quantum entanglement is noise. And if your quantum entanglement is not complete, then it doesn't do much good. And I'm highly skeptical, and so is I think everyone else, about entangling things at a distance with precision. But it's an interesting issue. I mean, that's why, but there's so many quantum breakthroughs, you see them every week, that you can see why the NSA said, we gotta prepare for this. Pretty soon, it's very likely that someone's gonna get something practical that works.
So how do you,
Yeah.
how do you basically prepare for something that you don't conceptualize?
Well, because theoreticians have predicted what kind of quantum algorithms are possible decades ago in the 90s. They figured out the basic mathematics behind quantum computing, and they figured out what algorithms will work. So they invented the algorithms even before the computers exist. Just like Turing did. Turing invented normal computer programs before there was any hardware to put them on. He figured out the logic and math of it. So they figured out what quantum computers should be capable of, and they're planning for that. But of course, you can't be very realistic in your threat modeling until you know exactly what quantum computers really do. So what we're doing now is trying to find something that is strong against an ideal perfect quantum computer. That would be what mathematicians generally do. And then you hope that the real computer is no better than that, because you hope you didn't overlook something in your idea of what a perfect one would do. But we don't really know until they really build them. And that'll be a couple decades off, I guess, before they have real machines that actually do something practical. But not more than that, apparently. And maybe sooner. Yeah?
With quantum entanglement, would there be no physical connection between the 2 points that are communicating? Would it basically be wireless?
Quantum entanglement must be set up by something like photons, preparing the space, which move at the speed of light. But after that, it supposedly happens instantaneously. So you first must prime the space. And that you cannot do faster than the speed of light. But after that, the entanglement is instantaneous. That's one of the many reasons why Einstein really didn't like it. But experiment proves that it's true.
So the question is about wireless connectivity. So basically, there would be no way to basically know if see any direct connection between the 2 points that are entangled together.
That actually is a very interesting question. If you have something like an electrical circuit and you want to know if it's entangled with another electrical circuit, I do not think there's any way to detect that. That was actually pretty cool. And that's why one attack against quantum key transmission is quantum teleportation, where you entangle it and make an extra copy of it through teleportation, and it can't be detected. That's what people say. That's actually a very interesting issue. Once this stuff becomes common and affordable, then one possible attack would be to sneakily entangle your bits with their bits, and then you could snoop what they're doing on their machine without there being any signal leaving that they could measure. That's actually kind of awesome. But we'll have to see how much of that really happens. A lot of some people say quantum teleportation is total garbage. All it is sort of sleight of hand where you trick yourself into being confused. Nothing really happens. We will find out as we move forward how many of these things are actually practical and actually accomplish something, and how many of them are really just smoke and mirrors, where you set it all up so it's really all done and then make it look like something happened afterwards. Anyway, I'll start these cahoots. These are good questions. So, 4 questions. So what's the attack on RSA that you stop with PSS? So it stops the existential forgery attack because it's no longer valid to just have random junk as the message. Now, the message includes an integrity check, so most random bits are not valid. And therefore, you can't just create random junk and sign it and have that pass the test. All right, which algorithm uses 2 cyclic groups? That's the real signature algorithm, DSA. It is pretty complicated. All right. And which algorithm is recommended by the US government? That's the DSA, okay. And which one does not use an ephemeral key? The only one that doesn't is RSA without PSS, which, as we've seen, is actually pretty vulnerable. All the rest have an ephemeral key, and if you put the PSS in RSA, it effectively has one too. All right. So this is NH and Ward. I think I know who Ward is, but I don't know who Wah is. Is Wah in the room? Well, that's you. Good. Okay, I know who you are then. Good. Good. Then everyone has been identified. Therefore, you will get your points today. Sometimes people don't, because they conceal their identity too effectively, thus attaining privacy, but at a cost. So if you wish to maintain privacy from me, it will affect your grading. However, it is an option. All right. So I think there's another thing I wanted to say about the projects. There's an earlier project that nobody solved yet. Did I point that one out? Okay, I forget. I've been complaining about nobody solving it. So number 12. People were doing this one last week, and they solved the early one, but the last one nobody solved. Now, I did find a mistake in it, although it's one I think you might have gotten. I asked you for Q, but I should have asked for P. So that might be enough to slow you down. But anyway, this one here is an RSA key that has been damaged. This part is gone, that part is gone, and that part is gone. And I still want you to find P. And it can be done, and it's really not that different of a process than the last part of Project 16, where you have to create a chosen plain text message. You're just going to have to try a lot of options until you find one that works. But anyway, when you're done, you get on here, and before class anyway, there's nobody there but me. And there's still nobody there but me. So I recommend getting there. This is not that hard. And but anyway, any other questions? All right. Well, I'm going to stop the share. I'll go to the lab, help anybody who wants to work on projects. We'll do it again next week.